It had hair all over its body other than the face itself.
There are, in fact, 4 different types of, what we think of as Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Very wide, pronounced nose. There was also a very ominous odor.
Phase 1 is to identify opportunities. I walked into a small clearing in less than 10-15 feet away from this enormous creature, and it scared the living hell out of me. Phase 2 is conducting investigations both of witnesses and locations. The size of the thing, it was 4 or 5 feet across the shoulders. Phase 3 is profiling research areas, what's there, how they move, feeding, things like that. About 8 feet tall, I guessed around 800 pounds. It was massive. I had no idea that anything like that existed. Phase 4 is create an intercept plan. I decided to shoot in the air to see if maybe it would scare it off. Phase 5 is the intercept and resolve the issue phase. It didn't do anything, it didn't react, and then I heard a noise from my right rear, and from out behind some brush come another one and walked over by the first one. That's when I decided to do what the dog did. I took off running. Welcome to Witness of the Unknown. So today we're talking with Gerald, and Gerald, let's start off. I just want to mention, we get a lot of witnesses, and a lot of people, are concerned with credibility, and I think the fact that you're a former police officer puts you in the bracket of being one of the more credible witnesses that we get to, for both current and former police. So let me ask you, I guess, let's just start there. How long were you a police officer?
That's 5 years.
5 years. Now, was that in
Washington?
And I don't know if we want to mention what part of the country you're in or anything. I like to keep people's identity,
that's
protected
right.
if they want to.
Okay, I'll just say Southwest Washington.
Okay, and now I remember when we first started chatting, you had some things that were happening around your home. Let's start talking about that. And how long ago was that?
Well, I remember when you were with the other show. I remember I started listening to your show because of my friend Robert, and he was in episode 10 that you interviewed him with. And once I started listening to your show, I started picking up information and knowledge that I obviously didn't have, or I was privy to, only because I wasn't seeking it, because I didn't believe in it to begin with. And once I started listening to people's stories, and especially you, Will, you had so much information out there. I wanted to get into your brain, Let
me ask you real quick. Now, when you were in uniform, and I know exactly where you are, so
yeah.
I know that area has a very rich history of sighting encounters. In fact, my second one was in that area. Did you hear of anything officially at that time much?
No, never did, Will.
Never did. No, people weren't beating the door down reporting.
Oh no,
Bigfoot sightings.
No, I was in the city.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I was in the city, and I the only time I ran north of Skamania County is when we were chasing a felon who wanted to depart and go north up
you were kind of breaking up a little bit there.
How am I doing now?
You're good.
Okay, I was trying to find a brace for my phone so I can actually use my hands. See, I can't talk without my hands. I'm one of those guys, right?
So you were chasing a felon, and who was trying to head north.
Yeah, we went all the way to Dugan Falls, which wasn't too far.
Oh.
Yeah, not too far from where you had your sighting.
Right. I was just thinking that was just north of that area.
Yep. Yeah.
So, how long, or I guess I should say, how long ago was it that you began noticing something unusual going on around your home?
You know, when I was up, like I told you, when I was Bear Prairie, several things happened. I started bow hunting, archery hunting, a few years after this. But when I was up there around Cardiel Road, up in Bear Prairie, I had downed a deer down in Eagle Creek, which is a subsidiary of the Washougal River. And after I gutted the animal, I brought her up, and I hit the main trail, and I was heading to my rig, and I heard this really deep guttural growl, and there's this tree, and this tree was probably 100 feet tall, but as it was on a steep hill, so if I was to look down over, I couldn't see but maybe half the tree. So half of it was, just by the angle is so steep. And this tree just started shaking very vigorously. And at first I thought it was I just wrote it off as a bear, But this tree, after, at that time I just wrote it off. It was a bear. And these are the experiences I started kind of piecing together, kind of put that puzzle piece back together to figure out what the heck I'm actually seeing out there, Right. And then I was up on off of the Wild Boy, and my first year archery hunting, and I walked down in there, and I did notice the tree breaks, and they were about 8 feet off the ground, and there were about, I'd say about 15 of them, and they're in a line, about 50 yards apart. Now, that's where I came up with that scat that I told you about. That was, the size of a pop can, literally.
Sure.
And I did take a picture of it, and unfortunately, it was one of my old phones, one of those old flip phones, And I thought I was really moving up in the updating into the computer science stuff with this flip phone. I thought, ready to go, Scotty.
What's interesting too. I want to mention real quick that general area. For those who may have seen my book, Notes from the Field Tracking North America Sasquatch, I put some pictures in there of some trees I found back in 1991 that were snapped over 8 feet off the ground. And it's in that same general area where you found those trees.
I've got a picture of my buddy Reggie, and he's standing next to a tree that was snapped over, and the snap and the twist is 10 feet off the ground. And I have Reggie standing next to the tree to kind of give it reference, So there's some big ones around. There's probably that big one you saw up there crossing the river that day,
Yeah, there's a few of them in that area for sure.
But after talking to you, things started clicking in my mind. Everything that I started seeing and smelling out in the woods, but I just passed it off. I didn't know what to reference it to, and I'd found scat up. My friend found some scat up there this year, up around the Crazy Hill area, and I sent a picture of that to you. And but anyway, here within the last 5 years, we got into this one area where we've been baiting elk, and I remember Reggie and I and his son Nathan and Aaron, we got this one site and we set it up, and it was pretty much to the end of the season. This is about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was sitting in there, and I was by myself, and it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I did take note that the atmosphere changed, and what I mean by the atmosphere, the best thing I can kind of try to help describe it is like it was in a graveyard at midnight, where everything is just dead quiet.
Very still.
The owls weren't, howling, hooting or no, like you'd always see chipmunks and stuff running around. All of a sudden, they were all gone, and I did take note of that, and all of a sudden, this uneasy feeling of being watched, and unless that's ever happened to you, be by yourself in the woods. That's the best way to do it. And
it's very disconcerting.
yes, it really is, Will. And at that point in time, I heard a whistle, and it was just a whistle, like, you know.
Uh-huh.
But if I was to talk as loud as I could without yelling, that's how loud that whistle was.
Now, that was sort of a two-part whistle, right? Sort of a higher tone than a lower
Yeah.
one? I know there's a particular kind
Yeah.
of bird that makes that noise, and I can't think of which one it is, but it made me instantly think about another witness that I interviewed from northern British Columbia, who was actually very close to the Sasquatch he saw, and he thought that it ran off, but when he went to look at the tracks, it apparently was only about 30 feet away in the brush, and it whistled identically to that exact same kind of whistle.
And it's really amazing because at that point in time, you know, I got mad. I thought another hunter came into my sight, and but I looked up immediately, and I did not see nothing. Absolutely.
So you thought it was a person there?
I thought it was a person, and
okay,
and so I got mad, and I just kind of yelled out, "Thanks, fella, for coming into my sight." You know, you carried your scent in, and now you've just blown my hunt for the evening. So I got down and I left. And I have to tell you, that was an uneasy feeling walking out of there. And the very next day...
So what made you feel uneasy? I mean, thinking that it was another person, what made you feel uneasy about it, though?
Because I couldn't see it, and it was so loud that I should have been able to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I was walking out, I'd always watch my back, and I just felt like something was watching me, you know. And I felt uneasy when I got back to camp. And so the next day I went back in there, and it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon again. I kind of skipped a morning hunt. I was kind of fatigued that day, and I thought, heck, I'll just go in at noon and just hunt till evening, which is a good time to hunt. And so anyway, Will, I went back in there, and it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm sitting there, and I had this feeling something was watching me from behind. And it was undeniable. I kept looking behind me, which I'm facing north. So now I'm turning and facing south, and it goes into the heavy timber. And it was so overwhelming that it was unnerving. I had to stand up. You know, I had to stand up in my tree stand and just literally try to focus on something, you know. And so I just said, to hell with it. I started thinking spiritual stuff, you know. You got to look at this as a layman with no knowledge of Sasquatch. Right. And I'm looking at this as something that maybe, culturally I can relate it to. So,
and up to this point, you didn't even believe in Bigfoot, right?
No, absolutely not. And so, Will, I just, everything, I thought it was like an Indian burial ground. Maybe I came into an Indian burial ground, Sure. And so I just, honest to God, I left. And I never went back to that site again. It was so unnerving. So the following year, I went down about 400 yards south of that original site, and my son and I, we put up 2 more sites about 400 yards south of that, and it felt good in there. And we've taken elk in there in our new sites. But then the following year, that year I was growled at. When you come off the road and you walk down the Skidder Road, and you come, and right at the end of the Skidder Road, it kind of veers to the left and it goes north. My son and I, we had made 2 sites down by Rush Creek. Anyway, when we came down the Skidder Road to get there, at the end of the Skidder Road, if you go north, you'll take a game trail up about 20 yards, then you go right onto another game trail, which takes us down about 300 yards down into our bait sites. And right at that junction, there's a tree, and I think I sent you the picture of it where it was twisted. Snapped right, and twisted. Right. And right in that area, I've been growled at twice. and it's south of that little turnabout there on the end of the skid road. And as I'm looking, I can hear, and it is so loud. And it wasn't a bear. Bears up there run from you. If they get a whiff of you, they're like they'll make like a, oh hell, they'll make a tunnel through anything to get the hell away from you. You know what I mean?
Let me ask you now. The first growl you mentioned with the large tree, how would you compare the two growls you've heard from this spot to that one?
It was not as loud.
These second two?
Yeah, these two weren't as loud as the one that I'm going to tell you about here in a little bit.
Okay.
But anyway, I immediately pulled my weapon, and I just continued moving. I was coming out at that time. It was about 5 o'clock in the evening, and when I got to that area, and I was kind of going to head west to go up the Skidder Road to go out to my truck. Right there, it growled at me.
And you thought it was a bear?
It couldn't have been more than 25 yards away from me, Will. It was deep, and it was pretty menacing, you know. If I guess you could imagine a bear being there and really giving you a good growl.
I've heard it myself and thought it was a bear, but then later thought, well, I've seen a lot of bear out in the wild, and I wasn't really sure, in retrospect, that it was a bear. But if you don't see it, it's really hard to make that claim that it was one thing or another.
That's the only thing is that bears up there don't hang around.
Right.
They're not
this time you were still thinking bear or some animal like that, right?
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But anyway, I kind of put it in my mind that it was a bear. Until the second time it did the same thing. And then I was talking to Ken, our buddy, and he was telling me that they'll squat and lay forward and lean forward with their arms stretched out. And that makes total sense.
Now, had he seen one do that?
I'm not sure, but that's what he told me.
So at this point, now he's telling you that it was a Sasquatch.
Yeah.
And what were your thoughts about that, since you didn't believe in him at the time?
Well, I didn't. I talked to Ken. That was, when we were trying to get things going, and this was afterwards. This wasn't. Ken was.
Okay, so was that somebody you contacted to ask about this, or somebody you knew?
Well, you and I, you introduced him to me.
Oh, okay.
That guy.
Right, gotcha.
Right, and so he's the one who told me that, that they'll squat down, lay forward with their hands out, right? And
right.
Well, what's that?
Right, yeah, you were breaking up just a little bit, but
okay.
Yeah, you're right. He told you that, and this was so people listening know, it was someone that I was working with at the time. That had his own knowledge about these things from his own sightings and such. And one of the things he had seen was one lying flat with his arms stretched out.
So that's, and putting that into reference, if it was a bear, the bear would have been moving. This thing did not move. It was in a still position and not moving whatsoever. It was it was basically telling me, hey, I'm here. Get the hell out, So anyway, after that, I left, and I was putting this in my treasure trove. I didn't put all these pieces together until Robert, and listening to your guys' show, and the following year, Robert, he was looking for he always did the spot and stock, and he wanted to try to do the stand hunting and over a bait. I went ahead and gave Robert that site. And be quite honest with you, I totally forgot about the whistle.
So you told him to go ahead and hunt there, but forgot about the things.
Yeah, because I just pushed it off.
Right, because, and again, I keep saying this because I'm looking at the timeline. You hadn't yet seen these things, so in your mind they didn't exist.
Exactly.
And a lot of people do that. They'll hear things or see things that maybe aren't directly connected, but they don't fit, and you tend to push that stuff off and think, well, you sort of put it in there as like, well, that's an unknown. I don't know whether you give it any stock or not. you just sort of push it in the back of your mind.
Right. Right.
Okay.
So anyway, that
so what
year,
happened after
this
that?
is about 2 years ago, I put Robert in that site, and he was pretty excited because he was getting a lot of elk pictures and everything. And me and Ryan, my son, had already harvested his elk. Excuse me. And Ryan, my buddy from Vancouver, he was hunting in David's site. And I was in a ground blind at my site. And we're about 150 yards apart. And just now, you remember, I'm south of my original spot where Robert is now, which is north.
How far south were you?
About 400 yards.
Okay.
My site was about 400 yards from his site. Now, about this same time, Will, I'm sitting there and I hear this. It's a gorilla. You know, it's doing the gorilla, really super loud.
Okay.
And my back is facing north, and it's the first time it went off, it was about 100 yards from me, and it was about northeast off my left shoulder.
And what was going through your mind when you heard that noise? I mean,
I'm telling you, at first I thought, I wrote it off. I said, hey, this is nothing more than an owl, right?
okay.
And then all of a sudden, maybe a minute, if not 30 seconds, this thing had moved 20 yards heading west. Now it's directly behind me, about 100 yards, and it did it again. And then it moved another 20 yards heading west, and it did it again. Will, it continued doing that, and what it was doing, it's flanking my exit. That's how
Right.
I come in at and leave.
What do you think it was at this point?
I thought it was a freaking gorilla. I'll be honest with you. I thought it was a gorilla. And after about the fifth time, Ryan, he's a real diehard hunter, He'll stay there till dark 30,
Mm-hmm.
And next thing I know, I see Ryan walking up the path. And so I figured, well, I guess and really, I didn't care. I was ready to leave, honestly. I did not know it was making that noise.
Good Lord.
And
I think I'd be ready to go too.
Yeah, so then I walked up and I met Ryan. And Ryan looked like he was in a daze. He didn't. It was like he was focused straight as I was coming up to meet him. And it wasn't until I kind of crossed his path, he kind of looked at me. And I said, hey, Ryan, are we leaving? He goes, and really, Ryan, he don't cuss, He wouldn't say it if he had a mouthful of it, right?
Sure.
But he looked at me and goes, Gerald, what was that? I said, Ryan, I think it was an owl. Now, Ryan has very extensive experience in the woods. He was raised in Alaska. They did the hunting camps and all that stuff. I mean, the guy knew the outdoors.
You knew he's wildlife.
Yes, he did. And what came out of his mouth sent a chill down my spine. He says, Gerald, it was a GD. And that caught me off guard. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was dead serious then. A GD ape. He says, Gerald, that was an ape. And I said, well, let's get out of here.
So he heard,
he heard
what you heard also.
He was calling it an ape.
Right, so he heard exactly the same thing you did.
Yes, he did. We both pulled our guns. And as we were coming up to the cat road, and we got back up, Robert was coming down. And he met us at the trucks. Robert was so upset. Robert is kind of a very no nonsense, He'll joke and kid, but he's serious man, especially when it comes to his hunting. And he and he kind of lit into us. Hey, I do not appreciate you coming up there and messing with my hunt. And I said, what are you talking about, Robert? Because he didn't know what we just went through, right?
Now your friends are all ex-police officers too.
Well,
right?
Robert isn't.
Robert
Kenny
isn't.
is. Kenny's a retired state patrolman, and Ryan, he's a captain with the Multnomah County Fire Department in
So
Portland.
this is a group of very credible people.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
And
off.
Robert,
So
he's
continue.
ex-military.
Right.
And anyway, Robert proceeded to say, "Hey, I was up there." Now, our other buddy Walt was hunting on the opposite side of the road, and he met us as we all met together at the truck, right? And Robert said that he heard a whistle, and when he said that, it came back to me. And Robert started describing this whistle. I said, "Robert, what did it sound like?" And he blew the whistle, And I said, "Robert, I've heard that before." And he looked dead seriously. I mean, he had 3, he's had 3 experiences with these things out in the woods. And he had 3 come in on his camp one night. But he looked at me and he says, "You knew about that?" I said, I said, "Robert, I thought it was a person." I said, "That's why, your area that I put you in kind of freaks me out, be honest with him, And he goes, "This thing whistled." He turned around, expected to see somebody standing there, and there's nobody there.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, it whistles again, but it's about another 30 yards. Now it's flanking his exit again, right? And that drew his concern. The third time, he was down about the trail that he would come in on and lead by. This thing whistled, but it tore a tree down, Will, and slammed it onto the ground. This tree is 50 feet tall and probably 12 inches base. We found the tree. It tore it out of the ground and threw it on the ground. And that's when he came out. He was coming out with his gun. And then we went ahead and proceeded to tell Robert what happened to us about this ape. Now this all happened at the same time, and I believe you were telling me that there's obviously more than one.
Right.
When we were talking about when I first shared that story with you, and well, anyway, to proceed to the following year, which was last year, it was kind of a disappointing year as far as hunting goes because of the wildfires that we had in the state of Washington. It pushed a lot of hunters into our area. And I get it, they want to hunt, and they're unfamiliar with the area and everything. And we had them walking through our sites and all that stuff all year long. And then we also had the meth heads come up, and they were cooking meth off side roads and stuff. And then we had the DEA, and the DEA was in there, and the state patrol was in there running around in Maine County, and I mean it was just a terrible, terrible season. But come to the last,
like a real mess.
What's that?
Sounds like a real mess.
Oh, it was. It was really a pretty disappointing season. So, anyway, it was the last week. This is, I don't know if you want me to go through Gary Austin.
Yeah, sure. Go
All
ahead.
All right. Prior to me having my experience last year, it was on a Saturday. I know it was a Saturday because my wife brought chili up for everybody at the camp. And it's kind of a tradition,
Mm-hmm.
So I left early that morning and came up. Well, anyway, Robert said he heard some guy hollering down by the creek, and he thought it was a lost hunter. So he hollered to the guy. He says, "Come on up here, follow my voice." And Robert was heading toward my site, believe it or not, and when he ran across this guy. And the guy came up and he said, "Gerald, he was just nothing but a tweaking hippie out there running around. His clothes was all torn up and everything, And I said, "Wow." I said, "What happened?" He goes, "Well, I gave him a bottle of water, and I told him not to worry. We're just a couple 100 yards off the road, and I'll get you up there and we'll get you out of here." And the guy just started flipping out, talking about tree houses and got to find his friends in the woods and stuff like that. And he took off and he just started running away from it, you know, back down toward the creek. And Robert, he just says, "The hell with you then," you know. Robert, you're going to chase you down. If you want to run in the street, go knock yourself out, right? So
Right.
Robert, it upset him. So I gave Robert my phone. I said, "Here, Robert, you need to call Skamania County and at least tell him what's going on. We don't want the guy to get hurt." I said he could have been delirious. Yeah, and the guy had told Robert that he had been lost in there for 3 days, and which is kind of hard for me to believe unless he was going in circles, which
Right.
is a possibility. But I mean, if you just follow the creek down, you'd be out in 3 hours easy.
Well, now this guy completely vanished, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't until like 2 months later we found out about that.
And what's interesting about that is it's sort of connected to what happened to you and Nick.
Right.
So go ahead and tell us what happened to
Okay,
you and
it was
Nick.
4 days later. It was the last day of hunting season, and like I said, it was pretty miserable. I haven't had any luck at all in my sight, but I'm gonna last it out. And I was up in my tree stand, and it was getting late, about 6 o'clock, and I had that feeling like I need to, it's kind of like they let you know, when you need
Yeah.
to get out of there. They're ready to hunt, and it's either by a whistle or a tree break or something like that. But doggone it, I wanted my elk. I put a lot of time and effort and money into my sight. So I started doing the calling sequence, and I did that. I normally don't do that at all, but I needed to make something happen, and so I did a calling sequence of cows, like a herd of cows, and then I threw a estrus cow into the mix, and then I threw a subordinate bull bugle, and so I do that. And I'll do it. I'll throw 3 or 4 of those sequences in 5 minutes. And I remember I did about 3 sequences. It's about 15 minutes later. 15 minutes later, all of a sudden, when I got done with my last calling sequence, I hear this owl. Now, this owl is 600 yards north of me, which would have been about 100 yards past Robert's site and on the opposite side of the creek. And, man, it came in so perfect. But I knew where it was at. I knew it was about 600 yards away. Now, the sequence that I'm gonna go through, this all took about 3 minutes. It happened so fast. It was incredible. As soon as that owl went off, things really started happening. The second time this is all happening within this 3 minutes period of time.
Okay.
The first owl, and then the owl hit again, but now he's 400 yards away. He's got to be right at the base of Robert's site, right? But Robert's not there. Robert happened to be on the east side with Ryan.
So
he went to a different spot. He wasn't in the area. But his friend, God, what was his friend's name? Anyway, it's unimportant. He was hunting Robert's site. And as soon as that owl went off that second time, to directly west of me on the opposite side of the road by Lone Butte, this deep guttural growl, and it was just, I'm sitting in my tree stand, Will, and I'm remembering it now. Oh boy, it's amazing how your mind goes back, And
it must have been fairly loud for you to being that impressed for that distance.
I'm not. It was so loud and deep, it shook me. Honest to God, every sense of my being told me that this wasn't normal.
Now, up to this point, you're still not.
No,
a believer
I'm a
in
believer,
Bigfoot, right?
Yeah.
Oh, at this point,
this time I am. Because
And that was after you guys had all discussed the
Right,
things that
right.
you'd
This is like
encountered
the
and heard.
following year after that. And
Okay,
after I
okay.
talked to you, Will. Okay?
Okay.
And so when this thing went off, I mean, it was, God, it was just, I wish I could imitate it, but it was just like something trying to turn its side out, you know, like, it's just, and it was so,
But it was
it
still a
was a
growl
growl,
type noise.
and it went low to high, but not high, but it was just like a higher tone of the growl,
Sure.
you know. And as soon as that guy went off, I hear 3 whoops that are 400 yards away from me, and they're 100 yards apart from the owl going west, 100 yards apart. There's 3 trails that go between Robert's site and mine. And I knew they were on those. I knew exactly, I knew exactly where they were. Keep the clock ticking. This is all happening from the first time I heard that owl go. We're doing the 3-minute thing here. Because when they all went whoop, the big guy went off again. He's 125 yards off my left shoulder. And when he did that thing again,
what sort of noise
the
did that
same
make?
one.
The growl?
It was that big, deep, guttural, demanding, controlling. He was the leader. He was the dominant male of the crew. You know what I'm saying? Because as soon as he did that, I hear that owl go off again. The owl is behind me. And then as soon as that owl set up, I hear 3 whoops. Now they're 150 yards in front of me, Will. And they're about 100 yards. Actually, they're about, in reality, probably about 30 yards apart. Now, put yourself in my position. I'm sitting in a tree stand. These things have militarily, strategically came in and set up an ambush.
So they come swooping in on you from basically 3 sides, right?
2 behind me. Now the big guy, he's off to my left shoulder, right? The owl's off my right shoulder, and the 3 whoops come directly in front of me. They're thinking a herd of elk are in here. These 2 behind me, the big guy and the owl, they're setting up to make the ambush. These 3 in front of me are going to be doing the pushing. They're going to come in and push the elk toward him.
So you have 5 of them around you.
At that point in time, I got on my phone. I was texting Robert. Robert, I think I just letting him know. I think I started something I wish I hadn't started. I'm going to leave now. If I'm not at camp, please come looking for me, please. You know. And he was about a mile away, and there's just nothing he could do. At that point in time, I said, I have to let them know it's me. So I remember you talking about sounding like more than one person. You know, act like there's a group of you.
Sure, talk out loud like you're talking to other people.
And that's the only thing. And I'll tell you what, that 40, that Springfield Armory sub 40 I had on my hip felt very inadequate. You know.
Now you had quite a ways to go from your tree stand to your truck, right?
Yes. Yeah, I had a good quarter mile, at least.
And what was going through your mind?
I thought I was going to die.
Now, did they actually follow you out? Did they make any kind of demonstrations or?
One flanked me on my way out, and as soon as I'm hollering from my tree stand, "Hey Jim, hey Phil, go that way. You know, I'm just trying to letting them know, hey, this is a human being up here. This ain't a herd of elk. As I'm walking out.
So they were.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Anyway, as I'm walking out, I have about 200 yards. I get to that one deer trail where I go to hit toward the Skidder Road, and then it's about 150 yards to the Skidder Road.
Now, was that the place you heard a couple growls before?
Yeah.
Okay.
As I'm, oh God, Will, as I'm walking out and I get to that game trail, and I'm heading west now. It's so thick in there, Will. I mean,
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
pretty familiar with that country. It's very, very thick underbrush.
that area between that skidder trail and the tall timber where I'm at, it's thick brush. And I thought, oh my God, this is it.
Yeah, what's your visibility? Maybe 10 feet
At that
in that kind of brush?
At that, Will, maybe 10 feet.
If that far.
And so I got my gun out, and it was a practice that I had done earlier that season because I saw the big one that season during when I was feeding, when I was taking the feed down for the elk. I made a practice of waving my gun in the air over my head. You know, I'd wave it like this when I'm coming out, you know, and I'm still talking. Hey, Pete, over to the right, over to the right, you know.
So you were sort of waving
it back
over
my
and
head.
Forth
Yeah, I'm waving
like
it like this,
okay.
Will. And
well, we can't see that on the audio.
I'm waving my hand over my
so you
head
just had it above
like
your head?
I'm waving at you in a parade, you know.
I see. So you're making the rifle very
well,
visible.
my handgun. Right.
Or your handgun, right. But your weapon.
So at that point in time, that area, that maybe 100-yard stretch to get to that skidder road, I thought, this is it. And if they don't get me in here, they're going to get me right when I go onto the skidder road, you know.
Sure.
And man, I'll tell you what.
But you actually made it to your truck, obviously, because we're here.
But when I got down, when I took that step out of the thick brush to go down the skidder road, I could hear something walking, Will, off to my right shoulder, which was north of me, and I expecting to see something standing there. There's a lot of vine maple in that area, so when I dropped down on that game trail, I immediately turned and looked, and I didn't see anything. So I just took a left and head down to the skidder road, and I started and head up to my truck. And it's not like it's, you know, you can see pretty well going up that skidder road to go up to my truck, but I can hear it just on the other side of the vine maple. I'd hear a branch break. And right, if you ever seen that pictures, I think I sent pictures to you of where my entrance is. It's thick right there. You know, you got a berm that you got to go over, and then you hit the skidder road, but it's thick right there until you get into the skidder road. Yeah.
Let me ask you something. As they were converging on your tree stand, when you first made a sound with your voice, you know, letting him whatever was there know that there was a person there, not elk. Did you notice the character of their behavior change?
It went immediately quiet. Total quiet. And that was almost, you know, that's scary in itself. I want to know where you're at. You know what I mean? And when they're quiet.
Sure. And when something's quiet, you don't know where they are.
But it was just kind of like that one was following me, because me and Reggie's been flanked coming out of there before after baiting.
Let me ask you too. You mentioned seeing the big.
No, that was that
before.
Same year.
Okay, well, tell me about that. We didn't cover that.
During the summertime prior to the season, Reggie and I went down here. You know, I don't like going by myself if I don't have to. If I do, I take my dogs.
It's always a good plan to go with somebody.
And anyway, if I do go by myself, then my dogs are with me. And I've had experiences with my dogs down there too. They've really alerted to things. And Reggie and I, we went over and I baited my site, and then we went over to my son's site and we were baiting his. And I was looking and I was scanning back. I was scanning the wood line, the woods about over by my site. And, you know, you see the shadows in the woods as the sun's passing over the trees. You know, you'll get the changing in that.
Sure.
But all of a sudden, about 70 yards away from me, I see this from the chest, torso up to its head, and like the right side of its body, and it's total black, and it is so camouflaged with the shadows behind it, you could easily look past it. But if it wasn't for the concave of the head, you know, the head,
sure,
that
the conical shape.
That's what drew my attention to it, and I just stood there and I started staring at it. And I was just, and Reggie, you know, he was sitting there talking as he was getting the alfalfa out and stuff, but I was just totally focused on this shadow. And I bet you I looked at it for 3 straight minutes. And all of a sudden, it knew I was looking at him, right? Because it stepped out of the tree, turned right, and kind of ducked down and walked away.
What was it doing when you first saw it? I mean, was it just standing there, or? But it wasn't aware you.
It knew it. Well, it flanked us going in that day, and Reggie brought it to my attention. Reggie brought that to my attention.
He saw it before you did then.
No, I saw him. Reggie didn't see him because his back was turned. But as soon as it turned, I yelled at Reggie, and by the time Reggie turned around, it was gone. And but I took note on where it was at and the tree that it was standing by, Will. And when I went there, that one branch I was focused on, this thing was 12 feet off the ground. And
there's a couple of really big ones in that area.
And I think this is the one that was the dominant male. That was off my left shoulder.
Did it leave any kind of markings other than just you seeing it, or was the ground
the ground wasn't conducive to that at all. You got your forest cover, you got your your vine maple. It's not as bad in the tall timber, but no, it'd be impossible to find a track or something. You might find a twig if you looked hard enough. That might have been broke or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, that area is not really very good for
animal
tracks in much of it.
It's not.
So
you're right. But anyway, we left. When we left, it flanked us all the way out, and Reggie was freaked out. For Reggie, he's seen tracks up there before, and I've seen tracks over on the muddy road. That was, I think it was 18 inches long, and and about the same size that Reggie says his saw. He saw his in snow, and
was he the one you sent me pictures of tracks in the snow? Was he the one that took
possibly
those pictures? Yeah, there were some pretty good pictures you sent.
Oh, yeah, that was last year. That
some
was
time back.
That was Jeremy Brock. Yeah, and that was on the Crazy Hill side.
Okay, and tell us about that. I mean, because that's kind of interesting. I mean, how do you come across those, and how
Jeremy was heading up. It was during gun season, and there's some snow on the ground, and he's totally aware of what's going on up there because my friend Garrett Clemens, his buddy Rob, has seen a Bigfoot, and he saw it down by Paradise Creek Campground. It crossed in front of him on the road during a rainy morning at 4:30 in the morning when he was going up to Lone Butte to meet with Garrett. And this thing went up that muddy hill like it was nothing. And from that point on, Robin would never camp. He'd always rent a house down by cabin at Eagle Cliff. You know where that's at.
Right. I know that very
well. He always rents a cabin. He will not go out in the woods when it's dark after that. And so we're all pretty aware. There's a lot of hunters up there. We know what's going on. They're there.
Sure. And I spent plenty of time investigating sightings up in that area, so it was always one of the better places that I searched.
And anyway, Okay,
so anyway, how do
Jeremy
you
was
find those
heading up.
tracks?
There's a road that goes up on what's that? Dante's Peak, or I think it's called Dante's Peak on the
Yeah,
Crazy Hills. It
right,
was a gated off
right.
road, and he started. And as soon as he seen the first track, he took a picture of it, and it freaked him out so bad. He turned and he ran back to his truck and he went home.
So he didn't bother
No.
following the tracks or anything. I don't know that I'd want to either. I mean, if you saw something like that and you didn't know what it was, you know, you wouldn't be prone to following to find out what the maker of those tracks were.
Now, another hand, if it was me now, I'd follow it.
Yeah, same here. My face would be down the ground following the tracks. I'd probably bump the top of my head into the Sasquatch by the time I got to the end of the trail.
Yeah. So, yeah, we've had a lot of experiences up there. Robert and I went up, was walking the muddy road, and we went up there specifically. I mean, Robert was big time. You know, he was going to make some tracks. You know, he bought this 20-pound bag of what's that stuff that you make tracks.
Oh, he was going to cast some tracks.
So he's got this 20-pound bag, right?
Oh, I usually carry 100 pounds of plastic with me when I go.
You are nuts.
Well, typically it takes, you know, for a Sasquatch track, you know, average size Sasquatch track, it takes about 5 pounds of plaster, 4 to 5 pounds per footprint. So, you know, pretty soon, you know, it doesn't take much to figure the math out. You don't get a lot of tracks out of 100 pounds of plaster. Yeah. I think when you get 20 tracks, you know, which now if you're going to cast tracks in a line of tracks, you know, get a bunch of them. That way you have a good, you know, comparison group to choose from. So anyway, that's just what I do. But
yeah. So anyway, with that Gary Austin oil field, it was like 2 months later, right? I pretty much put the season behind me, and I'm at work. And I get this phone call from a detective from Skamania County inquiring about this fella. And I told him, I said, well, I'd never seen him or talked to him. But my buddy Robert, you know, he talked to him. I gave him my phone. That's why he had my phone number. And so I turned him on to Robert. And Robert, they sent him pictures of this guy. They found his car up on the 65 road, which is only about a quarter mile from our Robert's bait site. In his car, they found a phone, and he took some selfies of himself before he went in. And so they showed Robert the pictures, and Robert identified him. Yeah, that was the guy that I saw. Well, his family is from Louisville, Kentucky, and they were concerned about him, and they're worried, you know. So anyway. I think it was a couple of weeks later they set up a pretty big search party. I bet you there's 200.
Yeah, I think he sent me pictures of it.
Yeah,
it was pretty large.
And Robert, he went in and he helped him. He took him down in that area, and they had cadaver dogs with them and everything. And they searched that whole Rush Creek area and came up with absolutely nothing. Not a trace. And I know we've talked about that before, about them carrying their victim off 10 miles.
Well, that's the interesting thing is there was this group of 5 Sasquatches that came in on you who were actively hunting elk, we can presume at the time. So they were very active in that same location where he vanished.
You know, who knows, you know.
I mean, now we can't say for sure because there isn't any direct evidence that they took him as dinner. But you know, I mean, like you said, you don't really get lost in that area because I mean, unless you're walking circles in a tight area, you know, and if he died there, they would have found him. So the question is, what happened to this guy? You know, and again, it's only speculation, but you do have to.
You know,
wonder.
they're a predatory animal. You know, they're no different than
correct.
A bear or a cougar or what do they pick out of a herd? The old and the lame.
Well, usually the sick and old and young.
The lame. Right.
The easy targets.
So you put yourself why they haven't messed with us that we're not old. Well, we're old, but they don't know we're old.
No, but
Right.
you're in a group
And
you're
here's
armed.
this guy. He's
so
straggling around down there acting like an idiot. They look at this guy as like like
well, he's by himself. He wasn't armed. He's off running around.
something's
the brush.
wrong with him.
So, yeah, I mean, so we can definitely speculate. And again, it's only speculation. We can't say
Exactly
because we don't know. But it is interesting, because of the conjunction of what was going on. There was, there was the group of 5 that you guys had seen plenty of evidence. You'd heard him. You'd seen him in there. And the fact that this guy just happened to be in the same place at the same time period. And
Robert was the last guy to see him. And that really, that bothered Robert.
Yeah, that's got to be disconcerting. I mean, knowing that you're the last person to see someone.
Yeah, Robert
ever.
said if he had known that's the way it was going to end, he'd have tackled the guy and drug him out.
Sure,
and he would have.
Hindsight's 20/20.
Because Robert, Robert's probably one of the most honest guys you'll ever meet in your life. Honest to God.
Oh, absolutely. I enjoy talking to Robert. He's he is very matter of fact.
And he'll call BS. If something don't sound right, you're going to have to work hard to convince him. But he's
that's true.
He's open-minded enough to accept it when he if you speak the truth, he'll accept it.
Yeah.
He's had his own experiences up there around McDaniels Lake. I went up there that same year last year. We went up there during the springtime, and it was the first time I ever experienced tree knocks. And
what'd you guys hear with that? Now it's not like on the silly TV shows.
No, it's not.
What did you hear?
Honest
Describe
to God,
what you heard.
It sounded like a Hawaiian beating on a hollow log with bamboo. That's what it sounded like, and it was very rhythmatic. Duck it. I wish I could. I'm not that rhythmatic, but
you're saying you have.
I don't have no rhythm, But it was very rhythmatic, and I thought, damn, that's good. Whoever's doing that. Then all of a sudden, right down below me, it happened again, and this guy wasn't as good as the guy that was above me.
Okay, I was just going to say 2 different locations. So they
about
were
300 yards apart. One was
sound
down below me, and one was above me.
So did it seem like they were doing it at each other?
That's what it sounded like. And this is a weird thing. I was shooting my 223 up there prior to that, and I probably let 100 rounds down through there. And Robert, he was up. He went up on Table Mountain, which is about a mile away. That's Robert. He wants to take off and do something. Go for it. So I text.
Yeah, you're not going to stop him.
So I talked to Robert and I told him, hey, I got tree knocks going on. So Robert, he came back, and this is the funny thing. I was trying to describe to Robert what the heck it sounded like. So I grabbed this tree, couple of sticks, and I started rat-a-tat-a-tatting on this tree. And right where Robert came back and dropped down into camp, one mimicked me up there.
Oh.
And it sounded just like me. And mine wasn't rhythmatic. It sounded pretty bad. So it sounded like me. And Robert freaked out. He goes, right there, right there. And, after we talked about that, we had a long talk on the way home. We were going back to Puyallup. And I was sitting there thinking, I said, they can mimic so well, Right. And I said, I wonder if they came down to check out who was firing their shots.
It could very well be,
they got on the opposite side of that hill. It drops down in the deepest, nastiest canyon you ever saw. And I told Robert, I said, what if they were raising the young down there and they came up here to check out what was going on?
Well, it could be. Here's a thought. I've read some articles recently about Wyoming where hunters are having trouble with grizzlies. When they shoot a deer or an elk, the grizzlies come running. They don't run from the gunfire. they run towards the gunfire knowing that there's an easy meal waiting there. So that's my thought in a situation like that. If you're target shooting, they don't know the difference whether you're hunting or not hunting. So it could be maybe they came to see if there was game down.
That's possible. I never thought about that, Will. I really never thought about that.
Yeah, I've actually talked with a couple other witnesses who, I know a number, in fact, that, and I should mention this I will mention this on another episode, but I had a gentleman up around the Eagles Cliff, as a matter of fact, back in 1992, who told me a story that he was up near same area, roughly, not quite the same area. It's eastern, or I should say, excuse myself, western Skamania County. He was poaching up there one night, him and a friend, and they shot a deer on the switchback above them, and there was snow on the ground, so they drove their Jeep up there, and they found where they shot the deer, where it fell in the blood, and then they saw drag marks, so something had dragged the deer away. So they took the spotlight, and they followed the drag marks, and pretty soon they came to this enormous bipedal, hair-covered creature that in one hand had the deer by the neck and was dragging the deer away. And he says, I wasn't about to chase the bugger down and try to take the deer from
No
it.
kidding.
So I mean, I've heard this a number of times where people have shot deer or elk, and these things are there and they grab the deer. There was another case I read in a book years ago. I don't recall. I think it was one of John Green's books, but the story was basically, I don't know if the guy was a park ranger or what he was. He worked, I think, Forest Service. The other guy was a geologist. They were on horseback. They shot a deer, or were about to shoot a deer, and a Sasquatch come charging out of the tree line behind the deer, snatched the deer up and ran off with it while they had the deer in their sights. So I mean, I can think of a number of these kinds of stories where that's what was going on. There was they're either involved in hunting or had shot game, and then the game was taken by one of these things. So I tend to think it wasn't just, they just happened to be there where I don't think it was coincidence. I think, the gunshot goes off, maybe they're not too far away, but they run to the sound of the gunshot thinking that there's game down, and oftentimes there is.
Yeah, I believe that. Why not? They're very intelligent.
Yeah.
The one thing I've really came to a conclusion about is I heard it put one day that as man has progressed from the 1500s to today, I mean, from bed warmers to walking on the moon, these creatures have progressed the same way, but in the wilderness.
Well, people should understand also, being a primate, and all primates are the smartest animals on the planet. I mean, everybody likes to talk about dogs and dolphins and elephants and things like that, but comparatively, they're not even in the ballpark when it comes to primate intelligence, and especially higher primates or hominids, and these things are probably, an unknown hominid, which means they're kind of in the same general family grouping that we are, not a relative necessarily, but in the same ballpark. So it's reasonable to think that, even while being an animal, they still have a very high degree of intelligence. So, they can figure things out, but then so do, other primates. They figure things out. We find out that gorillas and chimps and other apes are very clever, and especially if they watch humans do things, they can mimic and do things on their own. So that's it's very reasonable to assume that. But we're just about out of time, Gerald. So did you have any last things you want to say before we wrap this up?
Well, thanks a lot for allowing me to tell my story, Will. I appreciate it.
Thank you, buddy.
I'd like to get together with you sometime and take you up there, and we could do some wandering around.
Absolutely. Well, I'm definitely planning a trip or two there, so we'll
come and stay with me. You got it.
You got it, my friend.
You got it, buddy. Hey, thanks a lot, William.
You betcha, Gerald.
Say hi to Julie.
All right, I will do, and
I will.
Take care, my friend. Thanks everyone for joining me this week. Be sure to tune in again next week as we explore another account from a witness of the unknown.